Thomas Mitchell had served as a royal guard at Buckingham Palace for 12 years, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to discover on that foggy November morning. The 34-year-old father of two was conducting his routine security sweep of the palace's lower levels when his flashlight caught something unusual. The ancient stone walls of the basement seemed different today. As Thomas ran his hand along the familiar corridor, he noticed a section that felt hollow. His training kicked in immediately. Any structural anomaly in the palace needed to be reported. But his curiosity got the better of him first. Thomas had always been fascinated by the palace's rich history. He knew these walls had witnessed centuries of royal secrets, political intrigue, and family dramas. The basement levels, in particular, held an air of mystery that both thrilled and unnerved him during his solitary patrols. Using his regulation torch, Thomas examined the wall more carefully. The mortar between certain stones appeared newer than the rest, almost as if this section had been recently sealed. His fingers traced the edges, finding small gaps that shouldn't exist in a properly maintained royal residence. The discovery made his pulse quicken. Palace security protocols were clear about reporting any structural irregularities, but something told Thomas this was bigger than a simple maintenance issue. The wall section was perfectly rectangular, about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall, exactly the size of a hidden doorway. Thomas glanced at his watch. His shift supervisor wouldn't make rounds for another hour. Queen Camilla was away on a state visit to Scotland, and King Charles was attending a charity function in Wales. The timing felt almost too perfect, as if fate had orchestrated this moment of solitude for his discovery. He pressed harder against the wall, feeling it give slightly under pressure. Years of construction experience before joining the Royal Guard told him this wall was definitely hollow behind it. The sound of his knuckles tapping against the stone confirmed his suspicions. There was definitely space beyond. Thomas knew he should call his supervisor immediately, but something held him back. In his 12 years of service, he had never encountered anything remotely this intriguing. The palace was full of known secret passages and hidden rooms, all properly documented and secured. This seemed different somehow. The fog outside had grown thicker, casting eerie shadows through the basement's small windows. The isolation made Thomas's discovery feel even more significant. He was alone with what could potentially be the find of a lifetime, something that might rewrite royal history. His mind raced with possibilities. Could this be a forgotten room from a previous century, a hiding place used during wartime, or perhaps something more recent and far more valuable? The palace had always been rumored to contain hidden treasures and secret documents that never made it into official records. Thomas made a decision that would change his life forever. Instead of immediately reporting his find, he decided to investigate further. Using his multi-tool, he began carefully working at the mortar around one of the loose stones. Years of security training had taught him patience and precision, skills that now served him well in his unauthorized excavation. The mortar was indeed newer than it appeared, crumbling away more easily than century-old binding should. Within minutes, Thomas had loosened enough stones to create a small opening. Cool air flowed through the gap, carrying with it a scent he couldn't identify, something between old parchment and expensive perfume. Shining his flashlight through the opening, Thomas gasped at what he saw. The beam illuminated what appeared to be a small but elegantly appointed room, its walls lined with filing cabinets and its floor covered with an expensive Persian rug. But most shocking of all were the stacks of documents and photographs scattered across an ornate mahogany desk. Thomas's hands trembled as he widened the opening enough to squeeze through. His flashlight revealed more details that made his head spin. The room was clearly in active use. There were fresh flowers in a crystal vase, a half-finished cup of tea still sitting on the desk, and what appeared to be recent bank statements scattered among the papers. This wasn't some forgotten historical room. Someone had been using this secret space regularly and recently. The implication sent a chill down Thomas's spine. Who had access to create and maintain a hidden room in one of the world's most secure buildings? And more importantly, what were they hiding here? As Thomas stepped fully into the room, his flashlight beam swept across the walls, revealing something that made his blood run cold. Dozens of photographs were pinned to a corkboard, and every single one showed the same subject: Queen Camilla in various private moments, some clearly taken without her knowledge. The royal guard realized he had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than a simple hidden room. This appeared to be some kind of surveillance operation, and the target was the queen consort herself. Thomas's mind reeled as he tried to process the magnitude of his discovery and what it might mean for the royal family's security. Thomas's hands shook as he moved closer to examine the photographs. His training in royal protection had taught him to notice details, and what he saw made his stomach turn. These weren't casual snapshots or official portraits. They were intimate surveillance photos showing Queen Camilla in her private quarters, during confidential meetings, and even in moments when she believed she was completely alone. The photos were professionally taken with high-quality equipment, suggesting this wasn't the work of some amateur stalker. Someone with serious resources and access had been systematically documenting the Queen's private life. The implications for royal security were catastrophic. Thomas forced himself to focus and examine the other materials in the room. The mahogany desk was covered with financial documents that made his eyes widen. Bank statements showed transactions in amounts that seemed impossible, millions of pounds moving through various accounts with cryptic references and codes he didn't understand. One particular document caught his attention. It was a handwritten note on expensive stationery that read, "The Clarence House renovation invoices have been adjusted as discussed. The excess funds are secure in the Swiss accounts. C will never suspect the true costs." The note was signed with initials that Thomas couldn't quite make out in the dim light. His flashlight beam moved across more papers scattered on the desk. There were architectural plans for various royal residences, but they showed areas that Thomas knew didn't exist in the official blueprints. Secret rooms, hidden passages, and underground tunnels were marked in red ink throughout the palaces. Someone had been mapping the royal family's most closely guarded security features. Thomas picked up a leather-bound ledger that lay open on the desk. The pages contained meticulous records of what appeared to be art transactions. Paintings, sculptures, and precious artifacts were listed with purchase dates, sellers, and most shocking of all, their current storage locations. Many of the items were marked as being stored in various royal residences, but Thomas recognized several pieces that were supposed to be on public display in museums. The entries suggested a sophisticated art trafficking operation that had been running for years. Valuable pieces were being purchased through private channels, then either hidden in royal properties or replaced with expertly crafted forgeries in public collections. The amounts involved were staggering. Individual transactions worth tens of millions of pounds. As Thomas flipped through the ledger, he found entries dating back nearly 15 years. This wasn't a recent scheme. It was a long-running operation that had been systematically looting valuable artwork and antiquities. The royal palaces, with their vast storage areas and limited public access, provided the perfect hiding places for stolen treasures. A manila folder labeled insurance claims contained documents that made Thomas's blood run cold. Multiple claims had been filed for artwork and jewelry reported as stolen or damaged, but according to the ledger, these same items were safely stored in various royal properties. The insurance payouts totaled in the hundreds of millions of pounds. Thomas realized he was looking at evidence of a massive fraud scheme that used the royal family's properties and reputation as cover. Someone had been systematically stealing artwork, filing false insurance claims, and hiding the evidence in places where it would never be discovered. The royal family's privacy and security protocols were being exploited by criminals operating from within their own walls. The most disturbing discovery was a series of emails printed on palace letterhead. The correspondence discussed managing Camilla's schedule and ensuring her cooperation with the acquisition program. The emails made it clear that Queen Camilla was somehow involved, though Thomas couldn't determine if she was a willing participant or being manipulated. One email chain particularly caught his attention. It discussed using Queen Camilla's official state visits to facilitate art acquisitions from private European collections. Her presence at cultural events and museum galas provided cover for negotiations that would later result in pieces disappearing from public view and ending up in the hidden royal collection. Thomas found a detailed calendar that cross-referenced Queen Camilla's public appearances with art acquisition dates. The correlation was unmistakable. Major thefts and suspicious purchases consistently occurred within days of her official visits to various cultural institutions. Whether she knew it or not, her royal duties were being used to facilitate an international art theft ring. The room contained technology that shouldn't exist in a secret space. High-end computers, encrypted communication devices, and professional surveillance equipment were neatly arranged on custom-built shelves. This wasn't some amateur operation, it was a sophisticated criminal enterprise with resources that rivaled intelligence. Agencies, Thomas discovered hard drives labeled with dates and locations that corresponded to Queen Camilla's recent travels. Each drive appeared to contain surveillance footage and audio recordings from her private meetings and conversations. Someone had been systematically documenting her every move and word, creating a comprehensive archive of royal intelligence. The final piece of evidence that convinced Thomas he had stumbled onto something enormous was a business card tucked into the corner of the desk blotter. The card was for a Swiss private banking firm known for handling questionable wealth for international clients. Handwritten on the back was an account number and the words Camilla's Legacy Fund, current balance $1.2 billion. Thomas staggered back from the desk, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his discovery. This wasn't just about stolen art or surveillance photos. Someone had been using Queen Camilla's position to orchestrate a billion-pound criminal enterprise that touched on art theft, insurance fraud, and international money laundering. The secret room contained evidence of crimes that could topple governments and destroy the monarchy's reputation forever. As Thomas tried to process everything he had seen, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Someone was approaching the basement area, and he was trapped in a secret room filled with evidence of the century's biggest royal scandal. His unauthorized investigation was about to take a very dangerous turn. Thomas quickly switched off his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall of the hidden room, his heart pounding so loudly he was certain it could be heard in the corridor. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices he didn't recognize. These weren't the familiar sounds of his fellow guards or palace staff. These voices had foreign accents and spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Through the small opening he had created, Thomas could see shadows moving in the basement corridor. Someone was using a powerful flashlight to examine the walls, moving methodically from section to section. They seemed to know exactly what they were looking for, and Thomas realized with growing horror that they were heading straight for his location. The access point should be here, a woman's voice said in what sounded like a French accent. The shipment from the Vienna Museum arrived this morning, and we need to store it before the morning shift begins. Thomas heard the sound of tools being unpacked, the same kind of specialized equipment he had used to break through the wall. These people clearly had regular access to the room and knew about the hidden entrance. His unauthorized investigation had accidentally coincided with what appeared to be a scheduled operation by the criminals running the art theft ring. Be careful with those Renaissance pieces, another voice warned, this one with a distinctly Russian accent. Each painting is worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. The client paid handsomely for discretion, and we cannot afford any damage during storage. Thomas pressed himself deeper into the shadows of the hidden room, trying to make himself invisible while straining to hear every word. The conversations revealed that this was indeed an active criminal operation, and they were about to use the secret room to hide recently stolen artwork. He was about to witness a crime in progress, but he was trapped with nowhere to run. The sound of stones being moved echoed through the basement as the intruders began opening the proper entrance to the hidden room. Thomas realized that his crude break-in had only found a small section of the wall. There was clearly a much larger, more sophisticated entrance that these criminals used regularly. The Swiss bank confirmed receipt of the insurance payout from the Vienna job. The French woman continued. That brings our total to just over £1 billion in the Camilla accounts. Our patron will be very pleased with this quarter's results. Thomas's mind reeled at the casual mention of billion-pound accounts connected to Queen Camilla's name. Were these criminals using her identity for their money laundering operation? Or was she somehow directly involved? The evidence he had seen in the room suggested a connection that went far beyond simple identity theft. Light began to filter into the hidden room from the proper entrance, and Thomas knew he had only moments before his presence would be discovered. He quickly grabbed his phone and began photographing as many documents as possible, knowing this might be his only chance to preserve evidence of the massive criminal conspiracy. The camera flash from his phone was carefully concealed, but each photo felt like a risk that could expose his location. Thomas managed to capture images of the bank statements, the art transaction ledger, the insurance fraud documents, and several of the surveillance photos of Queen Camilla. The evidence was damning, but he needed to survive long enough to get it to the proper authorities. "Something's wrong here," the Russian voice said suddenly. "These stones have been disturbed recently. Someone else has been in the room." Thomas froze as the criminals discovered his improvised entrance. The sounds of urgent conversation and rapid movement filled the basement as they realized their secret operation had been compromised. He could hear them conducting a quick but thorough search of the hidden room, discovering that someone had been examining their documents and equipment. "The bank statements are out of order," the French woman said with growing alarm. "Someone has been through all our files. We need to abort the storage operation and secure everything immediately." Thomas realized that his unauthorized investigation had inadvertently disrupted a major criminal operation. The art thieves were now aware that their secret room had been discovered, which meant they would likely relocate their evidence and potentially eliminate any witnesses. His situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. The criminals began rapidly packing up documents and preparing to evacuate the room. Thomas could hear them discussing cleanup protocols and witness management, in terms that suggested they had procedures for dealing with people who discovered their operation. He needed to escape the hidden room before they found him, but the only exit was through the area where they were working. "Check the security footage from this morning," the Russian voice instructed. "We need to know who had access to this area and when. If it's palace staff, we'll need to handle this very carefully to avoid exposure." Thomas's blood ran cold as he realized they would soon review the security cameras and identify him as the person who had been in the basement during the time the room was breached. His face would be clearly visible on the palace's extensive surveillance system, making it impossible to deny his involvement in the discovery. The sound of heavy objects being moved suggested the criminals were bringing in the stolen artwork they had mentioned. Despite his desperate situation, Thomas couldn't help but wonder what priceless treasures were being hidden just feet away from his location. The scale of the operation was staggering. They were casually handling items worth millions of pounds as if they were ordinary packages. "The Vienna pieces need to be catalogued and entered into the insurance system by tomorrow," the French woman said. "Our contact at Lloyd's is expecting the theft report first thing Monday morning. The museum will discover the forgeries by then, and we need to have the claims process initiated immediately." Thomas realized he was witnessing the coordination of insurance fraud on an international scale. The criminals weren't just stealing artwork, they were replacing originals with forgeries, then filing false insurance claims when the thefts were eventually discovered. The royal palaces were being used as a massive warehouse for stolen cultural treasures. As the criminals continued their work, Thomas began to understand the sophisticated nature of their operation. They had infiltrated the highest levels of British society, using Queen Camilla's name and access to facilitate crimes worth billions of pounds. The evidence in the room suggested this had been going on for years, possibly decades, with each successful operation making them bolder and more ambitious. The most terrifying realization was that these weren't amateur criminals. They were professionals with resources, international connections, and the ability to operate with impunity in one of the world's most secure locations. Thomas had stumbled upon a conspiracy that reached the very heart of the British monarchy, and now his life was in serious danger. Thomas remained motionless in the darkness, barely breathing as the criminals finished their work in the hidden room. The sounds of their activity gradually diminished, but he knew they hadn't left entirely. Through the small gap in the wall, he could see flashlight beams moving in systematic patterns. They were conducting a thorough search of the entire basement area. The security logs show Guard Mitchell was assigned to this sector this morning, the Russian voice reported. He's been with the palace for 12 years, married with 2 children, lives in Surrey. No previous incidents or security flags in his record. Thomas's heart sank as he heard his own name and personal details being discussed. These criminals had somehow gained access to palace security databases and were pulling up his complete file. They knew exactly who had discovered their operation, where he lived, and everything about his family. The threat had just become very personal. "We need to determine how much he saw and who he might have told," the French woman replied. "Check his communication logs for the past 24 hours. Any calls, texts, or emails that could indicate he shared information about this discovery." The sophisticated nature of their surveillance capabilities became clear as Thomas listened. to them discuss accessing his personal communications. These weren't ordinary criminals. They had the resources and technology of a government intelligence operation. The royal palace had somehow been infiltrated by individuals with capabilities that rivaled MI5 or MI6. Thomas carefully reviewed his actions from the morning, trying to remember if he had communicated with anyone about his discovery. Fortunately, he hadn't mentioned anything to his wife or colleagues, but he knew it was only a matter of time before his shift supervisor noticed his absence from regular patrol routes. His phone shows no outgoing calls or messages since beginning his shift, a third voice reported. This one with an American accent. GPS tracking indicates he's been in the basement area for 47 minutes, which is unusual for standard patrol protocols but not necessarily suspicious. The revelation that they could track his phone's GPS location in real time was terrifying. Thomas realized he was dealing with criminals who had access to technology and information systems that should have been impossible to breach. The security of the royal family was clearly compromised at the highest levels. As the criminals continued their electronic surveillance of his activities, Thomas began to piece together the larger picture of their operation. They weren't just art thieves using the palace as a storage facility. They were running a sophisticated intelligence operation that had thoroughly infiltrated British royal security systems. The Queen Consort is scheduled to return from Scotland tomorrow afternoon, the French woman noted. We need to ensure Mitchell's situation is resolved before then. Any disruption to her schedule or routine could expose our entire operation. Thomas felt a chill as he realized that Queen Camilla's return timeline was driving their decision-making process. Whether she was a willing participant or an unwitting victim of their scheme, her presence clearly affected their operational security. The criminals seemed to have detailed knowledge of her movements and access to her schedule. Initiate Protocol 7, the Russian voice instructed. We'll approach Mitchell during his shift change and present him with an opportunity to join our organization rather than become a problem for it. His security clearance and access could be valuable assets if properly motivated. Thomas understood that Protocol 7 was likely their standard procedure for dealing with potential witnesses. They were planning to either recruit him into their criminal organization or eliminate him as a threat. Neither option was acceptable, and he knew he needed to escape the palace and get help from outside authorities. The criminals began discussing specific details about his family that made Thomas's blood run cold. They knew his children's school schedules, his wife's workplace, and even his parents' address in Manchester. The message was clear. Cooperation was not optional, and resistance would have consequences for everyone he cared about. The leverage is substantial, the American voice observed. Guard Mitchell has significant financial pressures from his daughter's medical expenses and his mortgage situation. A generous signing bonus and ongoing compensation could solve his family's problems while ensuring his loyalty to our cause. Thomas was shocked that they had somehow gained access to his personal financial information, including his daughter's recent medical bills from her surgery. These criminals had done a complete background investigation in less than an hour, demonstrating resources that suggested government-level intelligence capabilities. As he listened to them discuss various scenarios for approaching him, Thomas began to understand the true scope of their infiltration of British institutions. They mentioned contacts within Scotland Yard, MI5, and even the Cabinet Office. This wasn't just a criminal organization. It was a foreign intelligence operation that had compromised the British government at multiple levels. The beauty of our current arrangement, the French woman explained, is that Queen Camilla provides perfect cover for our cultural acquisitions program. Her official status gives us access to private collections, museum archives, and auction houses that would otherwise be impossible to penetrate. Thomas realized that Queen Camilla was being used as an unwitting front for the largest art theft operation in history. Her royal duties and cultural interests were being exploited to facilitate crimes worth billions of pounds, while she remained unaware that her reputation and access were enabling international criminals. The conversation revealed that their operation extended far beyond the United Kingdom. They had similar arrangements with royal families and government officials across Europe, creating a network of legitimate cover for their illegal activities. The British royal family was just one node in a much larger criminal empire. The Swiss accounts now hold over £1.2 billion from our various operations, the Russian reported. The money laundering through cultural institutions has been extremely effective. Each major museum exhibition or royal cultural event provides opportunities for significant transactions. Thomas documented as much of their conversation as possible using his phone's voice recording function, knowing this evidence could be crucial for exposing the entire operation. However, he was also aware that his continued presence in the hidden room was extremely dangerous. The criminals finished their immediate security assessment and began preparing to leave the basement. However, they posted someone to monitor the area and wait for Thomas to complete his patrol and return to the security office. Their plan was clearly to intercept him during his normal shift routine, making their approach seem like a coincidental encounter. Thomas knew he had perhaps 30 minutes before his shift supervisor would expect his check-in report. He needed to find a way out of the hidden room and escape the palace grounds without being detected by both the palace security systems and the criminals who were now hunting him. The evidence he had gathered could expose the biggest royal scandal in modern history, but only if he survived long enough to share it with the proper authorities. The weight of his discovery was overwhelming. Thomas had uncovered a billion-pound criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of British society, compromised the royal family's security, and threatened the integrity of cultural institutions worldwide. His next decision would determine not only his own fate, but potentially the future of the British monarchy itself. Thomas waited in absolute silence for 20 minutes after the last voices faded from the basement corridor. His military training from before his Royal Guard service helped him control his breathing and remain motionless despite the cramped conditions and rising panic. Every minute that passed brought him closer to his scheduled check-in time, but he couldn't risk moving until he was certain the area was clear. When he finally emerged from the hidden room, Thomas moved with calculated precision. He carefully replaced the loose stones in the wall, trying to restore the appearance of the barrier he had initially breached. The criminals would eventually return to use the room, and he didn't want to give them any additional evidence of how thoroughly he had investigated their operation. Thomas's mind raced as he made his way through the basement corridors toward the main security office. The evidence on his phone could expose the entire criminal conspiracy, but he needed to be extremely careful about who he trusted with the information. The criminals had demonstrated access to palace security systems and mentioned contacts within law enforcement agencies. As he climbed the stairs from the basement, Thomas encountered his shift supervisor, Sergeant Williams, who was conducting his routine patrol rounds. The timing couldn't have been worse. Thomas needed to act completely normal while processing the most shocking discovery in royal security history. "Mitchell, there you are," Sergeant Williams called out. "Your sector report is overdue." "Any issues in the lower levels today?" Thomas forced himself to maintain a steady voice and professional demeanor. "All clear in the basement areas, Sergeant. I did notice some minor moisture damage near the old storage rooms that might need maintenance attention, but nothing security-related." The lie came easily, but Thomas felt sick knowing he was withholding information that could prevent further crimes. However, he couldn't risk exposing his discovery until he better understood who could be trusted within the palace hierarchy. The criminal's casual mention of contacts in various government agencies suggested the corruption reached far beyond the royal household. "Good work," Sergeant Williams replied. "Queen Camilla's security detail wants a full sweep of all areas before her return tomorrow afternoon. Make sure your sector documentation is complete before end of shift." The mention of Queen Camilla's return sent a chill through Thomas. Based on what he had overheard, the criminals were planning to resolve his situation before she arrived. He had less than 24 hours to get the evidence to trustworthy authorities before becoming a victim of their Protocol 7. Thomas completed his shift with mechanical efficiency, maintaining his normal routine while his mind worked frantically on escape plans. He needed to copy the evidence from his phone to secure locations and identify law enforcement contacts who couldn't be compromised by the criminal organization's extensive network. During his lunch break, Thomas used a secure computer terminal in the palace security office to conduct research on the Swiss banking firm whose business card he had photographed. The Helvetica Private Banking Group was known for handling questionable wealth for international clients, including several individuals who had been sanctioned for war crimes and corruption. The bank's client list, according to leaked documents from previous investigations, included dictators, arms dealers, and leaders of international criminal organizations. The fact that Queen Camilla's name was associated with accounts at this institution suggested either identity theft on a massive scale or involvement that would destroy the monarchy's reputation forever. Thomas also researched the art pieces he had seen listed in the criminal's ledger. Multiple items were indeed reported missing from museums across Europe over the past decade, with insurance payouts totaling in the hundreds of millions of pounds. The scale of the theft operation was unprecedented in the art world, yet somehow it had operated with complete impunity. Most disturbing was Thomas's discovery that several of the stolen pieces were currently listed as part of the royal collection, the priceless artwork owned by the British Crown. The criminals weren't just using royal properties to hide stolen art, they were actually incorporating their thefts into the official royal holdings, making the crimes virtually impossible to detect. As his shift neared its end, Thomas made several encrypted copies of his evidence and uploaded them to secure cloud storage accounts. He also composed detailed written reports describing everything he had discovered, ensuring the information would survive even if something happened to him. The most difficult decision Thomas faced was whether to warn Queen Camilla about the conspiracy operating in her name. Based on the evidence, he couldn't determine if she was a victim or a participant, but her safety could be at risk either way. The criminals clearly had detailed knowledge of her schedule and activities, suggesting surveillance that went far beyond professional security protocols. Thomas decided to send an anonymous encrypted message to investigative journalists at several major newspapers, providing them with copies of his evidence and detailed accounts of his discoveries. The media attention would make it difficult for the criminals to eliminate witnesses or cover up their operation, while also forcing official investigations that couldn't be easily corrupted. As he prepared to leave the palace at the end of his shift, Thomas was approached by a woman in an expensive business suit who claimed to be from the Home Office. She introduced herself as Sarah Davidson and said she needed to discuss some security concerns that had arisen during his patrol. "Guard Mitchell, we understand you made an interesting discovery during your basement patrol today," she said, with the same French accent Thomas had heard in the hidden room. "We'd like to offer you an opportunity to discuss your findings in a more private setting." Thomas realized that Protocol 7 was being initiated exactly as the criminals had planned. The woman standing before him was one of the individuals he had overheard discussing his elimination or recruitment. She was now approaching him in plain sight of palace security cameras, using an official cover story to justify their meeting. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand what you're referring to," Thomas replied carefully. "My patrol reports are all filed through normal channels. If there are security concerns, they should be addressed through my chain of command." Sarah Davidson smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "I think you'll find our conversation very beneficial to your family's future financial security. Your daughter's medical expenses must be quite burdensome on a guard's salary. We might be able to help with those concerns." The direct threat to his family confirmed Thomas's worst fears. These criminals had done extensive research on his personal vulnerabilities and were prepared to use them as leverage. They were also operating with such confidence that they felt comfortable approaching him directly within the palace grounds. Thomas excused himself politely and continued toward the exit, but he knew his situation had reached a critical point. The criminals were no longer content to wait and assess his intentions. They were actively moving to either recruit or eliminate him. His window for escaping their reach was closing rapidly. As he walked toward his car in the palace parking area, Thomas noticed several vehicles with occupants who appeared to be conducting surveillance. The license plates were from different regions, but the vehicles all had the same high-end communication equipment visible on their dashboards. He was clearly being watched by multiple teams. Thomas made a crucial decision that would determine his family's safety and the fate of the evidence he had gathered. Instead of driving home to Surrey, where the criminals could easily find him and his family, he headed toward London and the headquarters of the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Command. If he could reach authorities who operated outside the compromised network, he might still have a chance to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. Thomas drove through London's evening traffic with constant surveillance vehicles, maintaining careful distance behind him. The criminals were making no effort to hide their presence, which suggested they were confident in their ability to control the situation, regardless of where he went. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he realized he was leading potential danger directly to law enforcement headquarters. At a red light near Westminster Bridge, Thomas made a split-second decision that probably saved his life. Instead of continuing toward New Scotland Yard as planned, he suddenly turned into the crowded area around the London Eye, the tourist crowds and multiple security. Cameras would make it difficult for the criminals to take direct action against him without massive public exposure. Thomas parked quickly and melted into the crowd of tourists, using skills learned during his military service to conduct counter-surveillance. He needed to lose his pursuers long enough to make contact with trustworthy authorities, but he also needed to ensure his family's safety before the criminals realized he had no intention of cooperating. Using a payphone near the Thames, Thomas called his wife Emma from a number that couldn't be traced to his personal devices. "Emma, listen carefully and don't ask questions. Take the children and go to your mother's house in Wales immediately. Pack only essential items and pay for everything with cash. Don't use credit cards or your mobile phones." "Thomas, what's wrong? You sound terrified," Emma replied with growing alarm in her voice. "I've discovered something at work that puts our family in danger. I can't explain over the phone, but you need to trust me and leave Surrey immediately. I'll contact you through your mother's landline when it's safe." Thomas hung up before Emma could ask more questions, knowing that every second of delay increased the risk to his family. Thomas then called Detective Inspector Rebecca Harrison at the Metropolitan Police Art and Antiquities Unit, someone he had met during a previous investigation involving stolen paintings found near the palace. Harrison had impressed him as both competent and completely incorruptible, making her one of the few people he felt he could trust with evidence of such magnitude. "Detective Harrison, this is Thomas Mitchell from the Royal Protection Unit. I need to meet with you immediately regarding a major criminal conspiracy involving art theft and royal security. I have evidence that could prevent billions of pounds in further crimes, but I'm currently under surveillance by the perpetrators." Harrison's voice became immediately alert and professional. "Thomas, where are you right now? If you're in immediate danger, I can have armed response units at your location within minutes. I'm near the London Eye, but I need to reach a secure location where we can review evidence without electronic surveillance. The criminals have demonstrated access to government communication systems and palace security databases." Thomas watched the crowd around him, noting several individuals who seemed to be conducting systematic searches of the tourist area. "Meet me at the British Museum in 30 minutes, Harrison instructed. "The evening crowds and museum security will provide natural cover, and we have secure conference rooms there for sensitive investigations. I'll bring a colleague from the Serious Fraud Office who specializes in international financial crimes." Thomas made his way through London, using public transportation and frequent changes of direction, employing every evasion technique he could remember from his military training. The complexity of the conspiracy he had uncovered required expertise beyond simple art theft investigation. This was international money laundering, art fraud, and potentially espionage operating at the highest levels of British society. At the British Museum, Thomas met Detective Inspector Harrison and her colleague, Detective Chief Inspector James Crawford from the Serious Fraud Office. Harrison had chosen a secure conference room in the museum's administrative area, away from public access and equipped with electronic countermeasures against surveillance devices. "Thomas, show us what you've discovered," Harrison said as she activated recording equipment and signal jammers. "Based on your phone call, we're dealing with something that could have national security implications." Thomas presented his evidence methodically, starting with the photographs of the hidden room and its contents. Both detectives examined each image carefully, their expressions becoming increasingly grave as the scope of the criminal operation became clear. "These bank statements show transactions that dwarf most sovereign wealth funds," Crawford observed. "We're looking at over £1 billion in suspicious transfers, all somehow connected to accounts bearing Queen Camilla's name. This is either the most sophisticated identity theft in history or evidence of corruption at the very heart of the monarchy." Harrison studied the surveillance photographs of Queen Camilla with particular concern. The quality and angles of these photos suggest professional intelligence gathering rather than simple stalking. Someone with significant resources has been systematically documenting the Queen Consort's private activities for years. Thomas described his encounter with the criminals in the palace basement. providing detailed accounts of their conversations about art theft operations, insurance fraud, and their network of contacts within British law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Both detectives took extensive notes, recognizing that they were dealing with a criminal organization of unprecedented sophistication. The fact that they knew your personal details and could access your financial records within hours suggests either significant hacking capabilities or corruption within government databases, Crawford noted. We need to assume that standard law enforcement channels may be compromised. Harrison made several encrypted phone calls to contacts within MI5 and the National Crime Agency, using code words that indicated the highest level of security concerns. Thomas watched as she coordinated with agencies he had never heard of, realizing that his discovery had triggered response protocols designed for threats to national security. "We're going to place you and your family in protective custody immediately," Harrison announced. "The criminal organization you've uncovered represents a clear and present danger to both the royal family and British cultural institutions. Your evidence could prevent hundreds of millions in additional thefts." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and continued anxiety as he realized that competent authorities were finally taking control of the situation. However, he also understood that his life had changed forever. He could never return to his normal routine as a royal guard, and his family would remain at risk until the entire criminal network was dismantled. "There's something else," Thomas said, producing the business card for the Swiss bank he had photographed. "The criminals mentioned that Queen Camilla is scheduled to return tomorrow afternoon, and they wanted my situation resolved before then. I think she may be in immediate danger." Crawford examined the business card and immediately recognized the bank's reputation for handling criminal proceeds. "This institution has been linked to war criminals, drug cartels, and international terrorists. If Queen Camilla's name is associated with accounts there, either she's being impersonated or she's involved in something that could destroy the monarchy." The detectives decided to coordinate with Royal Protection Services to ensure Queen Camilla's safety during her return from Scotland. However, they faced the challenging task of investigating potential corruption within the royal household without alerting the criminal network to their investigation. "We need to assume that standard palace communication channels are compromised," Harrison explained. "The criminals' detailed knowledge of security procedures and schedules suggest they have sources within the Royal Protection Unit itself." Thomas realized that some of his colleagues might be involved in the conspiracy, either as willing participants or as unknowing sources of information. The possibility that he had been working alongside criminals for years was deeply disturbing and made him question everything he thought he knew about palace security. As the evening progressed, the detectives received reports from surveillance teams they had positioned around Thomas's family home in Surrey. Several suspicious vehicles had been observed conducting reconnaissance of his neighborhood, confirming that the criminal organization was actively searching for leverage against him. "Your decision to warn your family probably saved their lives," Crawford told Thomas. "We have reports that unknown individuals attempted to approach your children's school this afternoon, claiming to be conducting a security assessment for Royal Protection Services." The news that the criminals had targeted his children filled Thomas with rage and determination. These weren't just art thieves or white-collar criminals. They were dangerous individuals willing to threaten innocent families to protect their billion-pound operation. Harrison presented Thomas with a stark choice that would define the rest of his life. He could enter witness protection with his family and provide testimony that would help prosecute the criminal organization, but he would have to abandon his career and identity forever. Alternatively, he could cooperate with an undercover investigation that would require him to return to the palace and pretend the discovery had never happened. "If you choose the undercover option, you'll be placing yourself in extreme danger," Harrison warned. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in the same basement corridor where his life had changed forever, but this time he was wearing sophisticated recording equipment provided by MI5 and carrying encrypted communication devices that would allow backup teams to monitor his every move. The undercover investigation had revealed the criminal conspiracy was even more extensive than anyone had initially suspected. The hidden room had been transformed into a high-tech command center since his discovery. Multiple computer terminals displayed real-time tracking of art auctions, museum exhibitions, and royal family schedules across Europe. The criminals had upgraded their operation significantly, Apparently in response to the security breach Thomas had caused, Detective Inspector Harrison's voice crackled through his nearly invisible earpiece. "Thomas, we have visual confirmation that Queen Camilla's motorcade is approaching the palace. The subjects appear to be initiating their final phase operation. Stay alert and maintain your cover until we give the signal." Thomas had spent the past 3 weeks carefully rebuilding his normal routine while secretly documenting every aspect of the criminal organization's activities. The investigation had revealed that the conspiracy involved not just art theft, but systematic exploitation of Queen Camilla's royal duties to facilitate money laundering for international criminal organizations. The most shocking discovery was that Queen Camilla herself was completely unaware of how her name and position were being used. The criminals had created an elaborate system of false documents, forged authorizations, and manipulated schedules that made her appear to be authorizing transactions and activities she knew nothing about. She was the perfect unwitting front for their operation. Sarah Davidson, the French woman who had approached Thomas in the palace parking area, entered the basement corridor accompanied by several associates. They were preparing for what appeared to be the largest art acquisition in their operation's history, a TUA collection worth over £200 million that was being stolen from a private Swiss collector during Queen Camilla's official state visit to Geneva. "The Camilla accounts are ready to receive the Geneva transfers," Davidson reported to her colleagues. "The Queen's presence at the Cultural Heritage Gala tomorrow night provides perfect cover for the final transactions. Our contact at the Swiss bank confirms that all documentation appears completely legitimate." Thomas listened as they discussed using Queen Camilla's royal status to authorize financial transactions she would never see. The criminals had created a parallel financial identity that allowed them to conduct billion-pound operations while maintaining complete deniability. The Swiss bank accounts genuinely bore her name and authorization codes, but everything had been established without her knowledge or consent. The revelation that struck Thomas most forcefully was the criminals' casual mention of similar operations involving other European royal families. This wasn't just about the British monarchy. It was an international criminal enterprise that had systematically infiltrated and exploited royal institutions across the continent. The Belgian operation netted $150 million last quarter, and our contacts in the Dutch royal household are setting up similar arrangements, the Russian operative reported. "The beauty of using royal families as fronts is that no one questions their access to valuable cultural artifacts or their right to conduct private financial transactions." Through his hidden microphone, Thomas transmitted this intelligence to the joint task force of British and international law enforcement agencies that had been assembled to address the conspiracy. Representatives from Interpol, the FBI's art crime team, and various European police forces were coordinating the largest art theft investigation in history. Detective Chief Inspector Crawford's voice came through Thomas's earpiece. "Thomas, we're ready to move. Swiss authorities have simultaneously raided the bank accounts. Belgian police are arresting the European cell members, and we have warrants for everyone in your current location. When I give the word, get clear of the area immediately." The criminals' conversation revealed the final piece of the puzzle that had been troubling investigators for weeks. Queen Camilla wasn't just an unwitting victim. She was also in active danger from her own protection detail. Several members of the royal security team were working directly for the criminal organization, providing inside access and ensuring that their operations remained undetected. "Mitchell's cooperation has been extremely valuable," Davidson noted with satisfaction. "His willingness to join our organization after our initial approach has provided us with even better intelligence about palace security protocols. The royal family's trust in their protection detail makes them completely vulnerable to our operations." Thomas realized with horror that the criminals believed he had actually been recruited into their organization during his weeks of undercover work. His careful maintenance of normal routines while secretly gathering evidence had been interpreted as genuine cooperation with their conspiracy. They trusted him completely, which made the final phase of the investigation both easier and more dangerous. The scale of the criminal enterprise became fully clear as Thomas listened to their coordination calls with operatives across Europe. They had been systematically looting cultural institutions for over a decade, using royal families and government officials as unknowing fronts for operations worth billions of pounds. The British operation was just one node in a criminal network that spanned the entire continent. "Execute, execute, execute," Crawford's voice commanded through the earpiece. Thomas immediately moved toward his predetermined evacuation route as armed police units flooded into the palace basement from multiple entry points. The sound of shouting, running footsteps, and radio communications filled the corridors as one of the largest, coordinated arrests in British law enforcement. History began unfolding. Sarah Davidson and her associates were completely surprised by the sudden appearance of heavily armed officers. Their sophisticated criminal operation had been thoroughly infiltrated, and months of secretly recorded conversations provided prosecutors with overwhelming evidence of their crimes. As Thomas reached the safety of the main palace security office, he watched through monitors as similar raids were being conducted simultaneously across Europe. The international criminal network that had operated with impunity for over a decade was being dismantled in a single coordinated operation. Detective Inspector Harrison met Thomas in the security office with news that brought both relief and continued concern. "We've recovered over £800 million worth of stolen artwork from various hiding places, and the Swiss bank accounts have been frozen with £1.2 billion in criminal proceeds. However, we believe significant assets may still be hidden in locations we haven't identified." The investigation's success was unprecedented, but Thomas understood that his role in exposing the conspiracy would forever change his relationship with the royal family and his career in protective services. He had helped prevent the biggest scandal in modern royal history, but at significant personal cost. Queen Camilla was informed of the conspiracy upon her return to the palace, and her reaction was a mixture of shock, gratitude, and anger at how her name and position had been exploited. The royal family privately commended Thomas for his courage and discretion, but publicly maintained that the investigation was a routine law enforcement operation. 6 months later, Thomas received a commendation from the Queen herself for extraordinary service in protecting the integrity of British cultural institutions. The ceremony was private, and the specific details of his discovery remained classified, but Thomas knew he had played a crucial role in preserving both billions of pounds worth of cultural treasures and the reputation of the monarchy itself. The criminal organization's leaders received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years in prison, and ongoing investigations continued to uncover additional victims across Europe and beyond. The case became a landmark in international art crime prosecution, though the full details remained sealed to protect ongoing operations and national security interests. Thomas eventually transferred to a new position with the National Crime Agency's Art and Antiquities Unit, where his unique experience with sophisticated cultural crimes made him invaluable for training other investigators. His family remained under protective observation for several years, but the destruction of the criminal network eliminated the ongoing threat to their safety. The hidden room beneath Buckingham Palace was sealed permanently, its contents serving as evidence in ongoing prosecutions. Thomas sometimes thought about that foggy November morning, when his routine patrol had uncovered the conspiracy of the century, wondering how many other secrets might still be hidden within the ancient walls of Britain's most secure buildings. The case officially remained classified, but Thomas knew that his discovery had prevented what could have been the greatest scandal in royal history, while protecting billions of pounds worth of cultural treasures from criminal exploitation. His 12 years of loyal service to the crown had culminated in the most significant contribution any royal guard had ever made to protecting both the monarchy and Britain's cultural heritage.